Okay. Unused Audio Files wurden gefunden. Wie kann das denn? Wie kann das denn in einem Patch drin sein, Alter? Das müssen die doch also da raushalten. Keine Ahnung, was uns erwartet, Freunde. Das Video heißt Cancelled Grand Theft Auto and Rockstar Games You Didn't Know About. Also wo man nichts drüber weiß und welche Spiele gecancelt worden sind. Und da bin ich ja mal gespannt. Hier unten haben wir die Zeitstempel. Unter anderem steht hier was von DLC, GTA 5 Story DLC. Da weiß jemand mehr als alle anderen. Und wir gucken mal. Das Video ist von Rocket Sloth. Und wir gucken mal, was da so abgeht. Let's go.
Not a lot of people actually know that this exists, but in the mid-2000s, there were actual plans for a Grand Theft Auto Zombies game. At the time of its
Mitte der 2000er war ein GTA-Zombie-Spiel. Ich mach mal Untertitel an. Ist immer ein bisschen leichter für die Leute, die nicht so gut Englisch können. Ne, um das zu hören, dann kann man hier noch ein bisschen nachlesen. Auch wenn das nicht hier immer hundertprozentig stimmt. Es gab ja ein Red Dead-Zombie-Spiel, ne? Red Dead Redemption 1 gab es ein Zombie-DLC. Die haben auch gestern das Red Dead Redemption-Spiel angekündigt. Also wenn ihr das Video jetzt seht, dann gibt es das eventuell schon. Dann ist das schon draußen. Am 18.08. soll das rauskommen. 50 € soll es kosten, ist ein Port mit Zombies dabei. Ich werde es mir erstmal nicht holen, weil ich habe noch genug Spiele. Ich würde es mir gerne holen, aber nicht für 50 €.
early prototyping, this project was tentatively known as ZTA, likely standing for Zombie Theft Auto, though that definitely wasn't going to be the final release title. And instead of Rockstar Games developing this game, it would have been made by a different studio known as Smackdown Productions, located in France. This studio was founded by Laurent Benadiba, who's most famously known for being the technical director for LA Noire, another Rockstar title. However,
den habe ich auch noch nicht gespielt, LA Noire. Ich glaube, ich habe das aber schon ausgepackt, die PS3-Version. Ich guck mal ganz kurz. Moment, geht gleich weiter. Ich guck mal kurz in mein Regal, ob ich das schon ausgepackt habe. Okay, Leute, ich habe gerade geguckt. Ich habe es tatsächlich schon aufgemacht, das Spiel, Alter. Die Complete Edition PS3-Version von LA Noire habe ich leider schon geöffnet. Huch, das war falsch. So, wir gehen nochmal zurück.
Rockstar title. However, this game would have still been done in collaboration.
Das werde ich mir aber nochmal holen für die PS4, gibt es das, glaube ich, ne? In besserer Grafik oder sowas. Es gibt, glaube ich, auch ein VR-Teil davon. Auch für die VR1 von PlayStation. Also LA Noire.
Like Rockstar or Take-Two Interactive were completely out of the loop on this game's early prototyping. Now, while info about this game is still pretty limited, we do know a couple of things: that this game would have been developed for the PlayStation Portable and was likely in development after the releases of Liberty City Stories, Vice City Stories, and Chinatown Wars, probably putting this somewhere in the later 2000s. According to Unseen64, ultimately negotiations ended up breaking down because Smackdown Productions and Rockstar were unable to agree on a suitable budget. While to this day no build of the game
also haben die schon angefangen damit oder noch nicht?
Has been released, it does appear that there was some sort of prototype that was working and in development, as a couple of screenshots do exist showcasing different vehicles to present.
Also die haben damit schon angefangen, aber eher so ein Prototyp haben sie gebaut und haben noch nicht wirklich angefangen, das zu entwickeln. Ne? Aber was hat ein Zombie im Auto zu suchen, Alter? Seit wann kann ein Zombie Auto fahren?
Game would look like. It very much looks like a standard Grand Theft Auto game, and maybe not too much on the zombie side was actually developed just yet. However, there is an image of this forklift that's really cool, and there is a scantily clad zombie woman that you can see in one screenshot as well. The zombie idea for Grand Theft
Aber das Cover sieht cool aus.
Auto, though, definitely didn't end there. As many of us know, after the release of Red Dead Redemption back in 2010, later.
Also das könnt ihr am 18.08. könnt ihr das auf eurer PS5 spielen, ist eine PS4-Version. Oder auf der Switch oder auf der Xbox? Keine Ahnung. Auf der Switch soll es auf jeden Fall auch kommen. Also ich bin ein bisschen enttäuscht, dass keine Grafik-Updates da drin sind.
Known as Undead Nightmare, which took the Red Dead Redemption world and added essentially a.
Und ich verstehe das auch nicht, warum die das machen, Alter. brauchen die Kohle für GTA 6 oder warum?
Full zombie game experience to it. And it looks like that idea would have been brought back potentially for Grand Theft Auto 5 as a story DLC that never actually released. This story actually dropped back in 2019 from Eurogamer, and according to data leakers, there was information found in the DLC update Diamond Casino and Resort for GTA Online that actually revealed a ton of information about the canceled story expansion that would have come to GTA 5. Now, way back when GTA 5 initially released, Rockstar did insinuate that there would be more story DLC down the road, though.
Finde ich auch schade, dass kein einziger Story-DLC rausgekommen ist. Also du kannst viele, die haben dann gesehen, dass viele auch den DLC, Online-DLC einzeln spielen wollen, ne, als Einzelperson, so wie ich zum Beispiel, und haben dann darauf reagiert und haben das so gemacht, dass du die neuen DLCs, die kannst du auch alle alleine spielen, glaube ich.
In 2017,
Ja, und dann hast du ja sowas wie ein DLC. Ist natürlich kein Story-DLC, weil du hast Michael und Trevor und wie heißt der andere Vogel? Michael? Keine Ahnung. Komme ich jetzt nicht auf den Namen. Auf jeden Fall, die hast du ja dann nicht dabei. Teilweise. Also nicht alle zusammen, ne? Du hast natürlich jetzt in dem letzten DLC, beziehungsweise nicht den letzten DLC, den Dr. Dre DLC, da ist jetzt Franklin heißt er. Der hier in der Mitte, hier unten, der ist da dabei.
Rockstar changed their statement, confirming there was no.
Aber Michael, glaube ich, war bis jetzt noch in gar keinem Online-DLC dabei. Wobei Trevor da schon dabei war.
DLC coming to GTA 5. The information revealed though in the Diamond Casino and Resort data mine suggests that at some point Rockstar was planning to do a single player DLC by adding an entire new map expansion and also to take the current existing map of Los Santos and redesign many parts of it to fit into a zombie apocalypse theme. While the existing Los Santos would be completely redesigned to fit into this apocalypse theme and have a full story similar to what Undead Nightmare did with Red Dead, there would be some new locations as well, and one of those locations would have been the casino that was used in the GTA Online update. Though it's very likely that the casino would have had a very different use back then. But here's the thing, this cut episode involving the zombie apocalypse goes way deeper into what was actually planned for this DLC project. It is speculated that you would either get to play as Michael DeSanta or Franklin Clinton from the main GTA 5 story as the protagonist, as there would be plans to use Trevor in a different sort of project, though it seems.
Mich würde mal interessieren, wie viel Kohle die bekommen haben für diesen Job, GTA 5 da als Protagonist da drin zu sein.
Clues are pointing to Franklin being the playable character for this zombie DLC, and apparently this DLC was.
Die wurden auch letztens gefragt, da waren Michael und Trevor, nicht Trevor, wie heißt der andere? Franklin? Ich weiß jetzt nicht die echten Namen. Die wurden gefragt, ob die irgendwas über GTA 6 wissen, und die haben gesagt, nö. Ich glaube ihnen aber nicht. Ich glaube, die wissen schon was.
Designs made for things like a boarded up version of a gas station, infected warning graffiti and trailer signs in different places, and also graffiti designs depicting zombies and people wearing gas masks on.
Aber Zombies wären ein bisschen langweilig, ne? Oder? Zombies in GTA 5?
Interesting here because it appears that the reasoning there would be just one main character featured in this episode was that the DLC would have released as 3 separate episodic parts that would have had each character from the main GTA 5 story involved in some sort of expanded or alternate timeline story. So with Franklin.
Ich glaube, die haben gemerkt, dass es da keine wirkliche Kohle, dass die mehr Kohle machen können, wenn sie das in GTA Online integrieren. Diese Sachen. Ich kann mir vorstellen, dass gewisse Sachen einfach integriert worden sind, anstatt die als Singleplayer-DLC zu bringen, ne? Und weil online kannst du halt Geld machen, ne? Mit diesen Cashcards. Cashcards? Nee, wie heißt nicht Shark Cards?
Was supposed to be the zombie character. This next DLC likely would have fallen to Michael, though from what we can tell, it could have been Michael and Franklin switched for either of these episodes. There's text strings suggesting there was a plan for an alien invasion episode as well, and while much less is known about this project than the zombie project, for example, it's suggested that this alien-themed storyline would have followed a character unraveling and encountering aliens to some extent. This might have been one of the later projects worked on, as it doesn't seem to have as much detail that would later make its way into the big data mine. But the third story in the DLC pack would have been the quote-unquote Agent Trevor episode, where this content actually would end up getting used in GTA 5, just not as the story that people had thought it originally would have been in this 3-part DLC story pack that got canceled. Out of the entire data mine of the cut content, the Agent Trevor episode was clearly the furthest one
Agent Trevor,
in development. In GTA Online's 1.14 patch script, you can actually find mission triggers, mission lists with code names and coordinates and starting locations, and just a ton of tags referring to aspects of what this DLC _ Agent Trevor would have been. There were some iconic points like Trevor Train, Trevor Finale, CIA lines. It goes down to Russian Jet and Russian Finale. There's a ton of different tags in the scripts here, and nowadays other parts were mostly incorporated into GTA Online content, with a lot of these story missions being reworked into the big Doomsday Heist update back in 2017. But some of these code names and files were discovered all the way back in 2014, 3 years before the Doomsday Heist would release, probably back when this was still story mode DLC for single player and not the online story that it would turn into. Now, besides the 3-part story that would have featured likely Franklin, Michael, and Trevor, there was one more thing discovered later on in a game update for 1.13 and 1.14 alongside that Agent Trevor storyline, and that was also more talks about the Be Lucky Los Santos casino. And there also were some unused audio files located from Lester.
Okay, unused Audio Files wurden gefunden. Wie kann das denn in einem Patch drin sein, Alter? Das müssen die doch da raus haben, oder? Also da raushalten.
That the storyline for this project that was discovered in the files back then was later adapted into the Diamond Casino Heist update, which should be said at the very least, since 2 sections that were cut content that were supposed to be in that story DLC, which would have probably been about 20 to 30 hours, basing it off of what early interviews suggested for a story DLC, that just maybe there's a chance that things like the Alien Invasion episode and the Zombie episode could potentially still come out in the future, as so much.
Also ich glaube, für GTA 5, da kommt kein Story-DLC mehr raus. Wenn, dann machen die das irgendwie online. Und das ist halt schwierig umzusetzen, wenn du Zombie-DLC hast oder ein Alien-DLC. Das wird wahrscheinlich irgendwie funktionieren, aber wenn du das halt in einer offenen Welt machst, du spielst ja mit anderen zusammen. Das ist halt manchmal schwierig.
Much of the story DLC was reworked into GTA Online in one way or another, as GTA Online obviously became the focus for Rockstar for like a decade. But who knows? Nonetheless, it doesn't look like we'll ever see the original plans for the single-player expansion that never came to be, but it still would be cool to see some of these things expanded upon, especially because already in the Grand Theft Auto 5 games themselves, there were some mysterious hints and lore scattered about, especially like the one on top of Mount Chiliad.
Also da wüsste ich auch gerne, was sie sich dabei gedacht haben, Alter, bei dieser Zeichnung, was das zu bedeuten hat. Kann man da irgendwie durch ein Schlupfloch irgendwie in diesen Berg rein, aber ich glaube, das hätte sonst schon jemand rausgefunden. Und du kannst ja zum Beispiel in der Software, die ich da habe, wo ich mir die Models immer exportiere, da kannst du ja rumfliegen und da könnte ich ja in den Berg reinfliegen und würde ja die geheimen Dinger da sehen, ne? Räume.
Which was for the Agent episode.
Aber ich glaube, die wollten einfach nur die Leute verrückt machen.
Fans have speculated over what these could have meant for years, thinking that it was something coming to the story or something that hasn't come yet. There's still hope for the future. This wouldn't be the first time that cut GTA content would be used in GTA Online. There were files originally found in GTA 5 for a cut heist known as the Sharmuda job, and way later on aspects of that cut content would make their way into GTA Online in the Cayo Perico heist, if I pronounced that correctly. What's funny is nowadays Grand Theft Auto Online is like one of the biggest projects that Rockstar has, but for a long time that wasn't always the case.
Ich frage mich echt, wie das funktioniert, wenn die GTA 6 raushauen. wie das funktioniert mit diesem Online-Modus.
However, the idea for an online Grand Theft Auto game came way before Grand Theft Auto 4's multiplayer or Grand Theft Auto Online with GTA 5 released. All the way back in the day, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Grand Theft Auto Online Crime World was apparently in development, which would have brought the older
Online
style
Crime
of
World.
top-down Grand Theft Auto games into an online setting for PC players, which would have allowed multiple players to play at the same time. Now, not too much is known about this, though there was an article posted in PC Zone back in December of 1999, which talks about
PC
what
Zone.
GTA Online
Gibt es heutzutage noch richtig gute Gaming-Magazine? Also sowas wie PlayStation-Magazin oder sowas. Früher gab es die immer zur PlayStation 1-Zeit. Da waren immer so Demo-CDs dabei, das war geil. Dann hat man sich die immer geholt, die war relativ teuer, ich glaube 10 Mark oder so. Oder 16 Mark. War ganz schön teuer, diese Zeitung mit CD, die gab es auch ohne. Und da konnte man immer die Demos spielen. Und heute schaffen sie es nicht mal, dir digital eine Demo zur Verfügung zu stellen, oder du sollst dafür extra zahlen. Oder du musst irgendein bestimmtes Abo haben.
Rockstar will be taking Grand Theft Auto likely to the 3D format sometime in the future, which obviously they would when Grand Theft Auto 3 would release. It seems like after Grand Theft Auto 3 was announced, though, nothing was ever brought up again about Grand Theft Auto Online Crime World, and of course, online multiplayer wouldn't be added to Grand Theft Auto until Grand Theft Auto 4. It is possible that Grand Theft Auto Online Crime World did see an early cancellation, as with the big and ambitious development of Grand Theft Auto 3, there were plans early on to have an online functionality for this game as well. Hidden in the game files are leftover text strings for things involving multiplayer, like text for searching for games, connecting to the internet, numbers of players. There's even some game types listed in there, like Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, something called Stash the Cash, Rat Race, and Domination. There even were unused multiplayer menu backgrounds that never were added into the game. A lot of this information nowadays is archived on the cutting room floor, which also states that according to Rockstar, this
Ist das eigentlich nur Rockstar? Ja. Canceled Grand Theft Auto and Rockstar Games you didn't know about.
multiplayer
Gut zu
mode
wissen.
for Grand Theft Auto 3's online
Habe ich ja vorhin erst
favor
vorgelesen, ne?
of putting more resources for Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which would be the next Grand Theft Auto game.
Aber ich glaube, der erste Online-Modus, der kam in GTA 4, ne?
Released relatively
Vorher
shortly
gab's da
after
noch nichts.
GTA 3. Still, it is interesting to see how online was born off of an idea from Grand Theft Auto that was based around this original top-down perspective that the first two GTA games had. There was actually some more interesting projects that were from the top-down perspective that also never made their way out to release. There was a Grand Theft Auto port planned for the Sega Saturn that never got to see a release. Lead programmer Keith Hamilton actually talked a little bit about the Sega Saturn version of Grand Theft Auto, which would have been just a port of the PC version, though it would have possibly used a different engine, likely the engine from a different Sega Saturn game known as Clockwork Knight, which did have some 3D functionality and
Was
enhanced
ist das Spiel? Clockwork Knight?
graphics, which may have meant that in this version of Grand Theft Auto, there could have been some higher level of detail and quality to the design of the game. Not too much else is known about what happened to this project. We do know that a version of Grand Theft Auto was ported for the original PlayStation, and it is very well likely that Rockstar, after seeing how the Sega Saturn wasn't performing very well in North America, just chose to scrap the project altogether. Still, all these years later, there were various screenshots showcasing Grand Theft Auto Online for the Sega Saturn, which are some of the images that you saw while we were talking about this, and still, it's just interesting that this never came to fruition. Now, after the success of the PlayStation port of Grand Theft Auto, there were some plans to bring Grand Theft Auto, this time to the Nintendo 64, which would have been a direct port, though it would have had some enhancements.
Gab's aber nie, ne?
graphic
Es gab nie für einen N64 GTA, glaube ich.
It even had some coverage in gaming press, though once again, this project would never come to fruition and never saw a release. Next, when it comes to Grand Theft Auto, on the Game Boy Advance, there was a release of Grand Theft Auto, which is very interesting to look at the gameplay of that now. However, it seems like there were plans also to coincide with the release of Grand Theft Auto 3 to have another Grand Theft Auto game released on the Game Boy Advance to ride off the hype of GTA 3 called Grand Theft Auto 3, which of course, though, would have been for the Game Boy Advance and wouldn't have been 3D like what the main game was. Another instance of a game prototype that not too much is known about, other than the fact that it would have been developed by Crawfish Interactive and then probably published by Destination Software Inc., but of course would have worked.
Gibt's die alle noch, die Butzen da?
Alongside
Wahrscheinlich nicht, ne?
the release of this title. Unfortunately, this never actually came to fruition and never released, and the next handheld GTA game with the top-down perspective would end up being Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars, which would release on the DS later on. One of the biggest and most mysterious titles, though, that Rockstar had announced that we never heard anything from again, not even an official cancellation, was a title known as Agent, which would have used the Rage engine, which is the same engine that current Grand Theft Auto games are built in. Not too much is actually known about
Agent.
What we do know is that it was going to be developed by Rockstar North and was originally planned to be a PlayStation 3 exclusive game. It was announced in 2009 and was called a future AAA title that would have been published by Take-Two Interactive, just like the Grand Theft Auto games. Now, development of this game
Wahrscheinlich so ein Max Payne-Ding, ne? Irgendwie.
Likely all the way back to 2007 when there were talks about Rockstar working on developing a brand new franchise, but it wasn't until 2009 that we got a little bit of information, and all we knew is that this game, quote-unquote called Agent, would have been set during the Cold War and would have players involved to some extent in the world of counterintelligence, espionage, and political assassinations. It might have been a little more serious in tone than a lot of the Grand Theft Auto titles, but still a very unique perspective that might have been placed in the mid to late 1970s for a specific time period. After the initial announcement, not much was ever brought up about the game again, though 2 years later in 2011, Take-Two confirmed that the game was still in the development phases. However, anytime the game was brought up in future years, the statement that would be used across the board from Rockstar representatives was, "We have nothing to talk about," or "Nothing's been announced about that title yet." When it was announced that the PlayStation 4 was coming on the horizon, a lot of fans suspected that Agent might have been moved to be an exclusive PS4 title, though once again, there was never an announcement of the game. Grand Theft.
Mich würde mal interessieren, wie intern sowas gehandelt wird, Alter. Weil da müssen ja Leute dran arbeiten und irgendwann müssen die ja sagen, jo, ihr könnt aufhören dran zu arbeiten, machen wir nicht mehr weiter, lohnt sich nicht. Wir machen GTA 6 oder so.
And even following the release of Grand Theft Auto 5, there still was never anything brought up about this Agent game ever again. Later on, a developer from Rockstar Games would post some screenshots of areas that they designed for the Agent game on their ArtStation account and a logo for the game, but outside of that, that's all we ever saw from Agent, and to this day,
das Logo ist witzig mit der Knarre da drin.
What happened to it. Some of you may remember that back during the PS2 days, Rockstar released a game known as The Warriors, which was a beat-em-up 3D game based on the movie of the same title. After the release of that game, it seemed like Rockstar Toronto was going to work on a follow-up game, but this time would be a spiritual successor, not actually based on any specific movie, and Rockstar would create their own universe and IP, but based on a lot of the features, functionality, and gameplay.
Noch nie gehört, Alter.
This project, known as We Are the Mods, but the fan community refers to it still as The Warriors 2, never saw the light of day, but what we do know is that it was in development in 2006 as a PS2 project, but eventually Rockstar decided to move it to the Xbox 360. It would have featured mods and rockers as two conflicting British youth subcultures in the early to mid 1960s and early 1970s. But what's interesting about this is the game was originally never supposed to be announced to begin with. It only was actually unveiled because of leaked assets in 2011 that revealed some projects that Rockstar had been working on internally. One of them
zeigen da irgendwelche Modelle, Alter, und das soll bedeuten, dass es von dem Spiel kommt?
Being what people thought was a Warriors sequel. It seems like ultimately though this project ended up
um was geht's da? Einfach nur dröschen, Rufkloppen oder was?
Because Rockstar
Wahrscheinlich,
Toronto ended up being reassigned to help with development on Manhunt 2, which was a bigger priority at the time for Rockstar, so this game ended up getting left behind and just a few assets have been
Männerhand war doch verboten, oder? Ich glaube, in Deutschland ist das indiziert worden.
Way back in the late 90s and early 2000s, Spec Ops was a game that Take-Two Interactive had published and saw some moderate success to. And after the release of Spec Ops Covert Assault and Spec Ops Airborne Commando, it seemed like Take-Two Interactive tasked Rockstar Games at developing a Spec Ops game to revive.
Oh, ich hasse das. Dieses von oben Spec Ops Ding. Das gab's bei Call of Duty Cold War war das, glaube ich. Oh, hab ich gehasst, Alter.
Other than just a press release announcing that Rockstar was working on a ton of different games and Spec Ops was one of the games in the long list, not too much else was really discussed about Rockstar's Spec Ops game. A singer known as Josh Homme did confirm that he was writing the soundtrack for the game and talked a little bit about the music and said that working with Rockstar on a game was a dream come true. And eventually some concept art would be released of the game, but outside of that, nothing ever came to fruition. It seemed like Rockstar pivoted as this team that was working on this project ended up.
Das ist Bully, oder? Heißt das nicht so, Bully? Den habe ich das ja auch noch nie gespielt.
On the game Bully instead. Now the Bully series in itself is really interesting when it comes to Rockstar's canceled games, because after the release of Bully, there was a ton of speculation from the fans for a very long time that Bully 2 had been in secret development, and it wasn't until only a few years ago where we finally got confirmation.
Aber jetzt mal ganz ehrlich, wer würde sich denn Bully 2 kaufen, nur weil da Rockstar Games draufsteht? Ich glaube, die nutzen gerade alle ihre Kapazitäten für GTA 6. Und das mit Red Dead Redemption 1, dieser Port, das ist auch nur so ein Ding, um die Leute so ein bisschen an der Stange zu halten, ne? Damit ein bisschen an der Leine zu halten, so. Damit die nicht komplett ausrasten, weil irgendwie hört keiner was von GTA 6. Deswegen haben die aus dem Port gebracht. Also, wenn da jetzt ein Remake gekommen wäre, wo haben die denn die Kapazitäten her dafür? Ja. Hätte ich zum Beispiel nicht, hätte ich nicht verstanden. Was ich noch krasser finde, dass es keine großen Leaks gibt davon. Also außer den Leak, wo das halbe Spiel da gezeigt worden ist. Von diesem Hacker. Aber es gibt keine Informationen ansonsten, ne? Also klar, durch den Leak ist natürlich einiges ans Licht gekommen, aber es gibt irgendwie keine kleinen Schnipsel oder so. Das wird richtig verschlossen. Ich glaube, die müssen auch mit dem Leben bezahlen. Also die unterschreiben wahrscheinlich irgendeinen Vertrag. Ich meine, an GTA 5 haben 10.000 Leute mitgearbeitet und da ist nichts durchgesickert. Das muss man sich mal vorstellen. Wie geht sowas? Und wir haben jetzt 2023 und wir haben bald 2024 und also wir haben jetzt 10-jährige Jubiläum von GTA 5. Und so langsam dürfte ja mal was kommen, ne? Aber das Ding wird halt riesig, ne? Und wie lange soll das gehen dann? 15 Jahre? 20 Jahre? Wie lange ist GTA 6?
2011, Dan Houser, who was talking about Max Payne 3, also talked about keeping the options open for a Bully sequel, but also talked about how the timing wasn't right after the release of Bully. Later on, Dan Houser would even say he had numerous ideas for another Bully game. Back in 2019, a YouTuber known as Swegta did a discussion talking about possibilities of a Bully 2 game that was in development around the time that Red Dead Redemption was in development, but never got off the ground, and more manpower needed to be resourced to Red Dead Redemption. So the prototype of whatever Bully 2 would have been.
Ich meine, klar, danach, nach GTA 5 ist natürlich auch, ging's wahrscheinlich dann auch los mit Red Dead Redemption 2. Ne? So.
Kind of fell apart, and this ended up getting partially confirmed by another news outlet known as Video Game Chronicles, which added that a short section of Bully 2 was playable at some point and speculated the story would have taken place in the summertime, possibly in between school years. But nonetheless, Bully 2 ended up fizzling out and never saw its release. It's still, of course, possible Bully could see a return one day. Back in 2013, Rockstar renewed the trademark for Bully, and then they renewed it again in 2021, but outside of the the original game being available on newer consoles, it doesn't look like too much is planned for the future, so we'll just have to wait and find out. Then there was the canceled Rockstar game known as Oni 2. Originally, Rockstar published Oni, developed by Bungie back in the early days of Bungie before they were fully committed to Halo, and after the release of the first Oni title, it seemed like the rights rolled back to Rockstar Games, and they assigned a new studio, Angel Studios, who they had recently acquired, to begin work on a follow-up game in the Oni franchise, which potentially would have used that same Rage engine that Grand Theft Auto is built off of, especially because Angel Studios were...
Da hätte ich gerne ein Remake von. Ich hoffe, wenn die GTA 6 rausbringen, keine Ahnung, in 2 Jahren oder so, dass die dann danach nochmal sich dran setzen und da ein Remake machen. Also ein richtiges Remake. So ein Remake wie bei Mafia. Mafia 1, Alter. Das war geil. Ich habe dann den ersten Teil ja nie gespielt, ne? Aber das Remake habe ich gespielt und das war echt schon cool. Da könnt ihr im Übrigen auf meinem YouTube-Channel das komplette Let's Play finden.
Start establishing that engine. Once again, another canceled title where not too much is known about it, but it does seem like Oni 2 had 2 working titles, one called Death and Taxes, and the other game internally used known as Oni 2 Rebirth, which likely would have been the real title. I don't know. Oni 2 Death and Taxes does have a main menu screen, so maybe that one was the real title. Now, to an extent, it seems like Oni 2 actually was in further development than some of the other titles we've talked about in this video, but also it seems like so much of the process of getting this game off the ground was spent in just moving people around and projects around to get this game started. According to some sources, the movement and combat systems were considerably more complex than what the original Oni game would have had, and would have had grappling and parrying, something that wasn't in the original game. There'd also be some movement enhancements like ledge grabbing and AI that could disarm the player, and it seemed like a lot of the movement was being refined for the future release of the game. A lot of concept art for the game was developed, there were even some prototype designs made, and if you're wondering where this footage comes from, in 2016, a development build of the game was leaked and archived on the YouTube preservation channel PTOP Online. As far as story is concerned, it didn't look like too much development or writing had even begun yet.
Deswegen ist es wahrscheinlich auch nicht mehr rausgekommen, weil es geleakt worden ist und es hat sich dann nicht mehr gelohnt.
But this game would end up not ever seeing a release. Maybe Oni wasn't successful enough financially, or perhaps they needed more hands on deck for Grand Theft Auto 4, and this game would end up being scrapped alongside all the other games we've talked about in this video. And then, last but not least, there apparently was development on 2 major remasters over at Rockstar that seemingly have been canceled or at least delayed as of now. These are more recent titles, so
ja gut, das erste können wir jetzt erstmal knicken, ne? Red Dead Redemption, das ist, von wann ist denn das Video? Ich guck mal kurz. Das ist von vor 2 Tagen. Also gestern wurde das angekündigt, deswegen, ich weiß jetzt nicht, es war gestern, ne? Gestern wurde Red Dead Redemption, also am 7.8.2023 wurde das angekündigt, das Remake, und das wird es jetzt nicht geben. Es gibt nur einen Port. Also ein Port bedeutet die Originalversion einfach auf einer anderen Konsole. Wie das aber funktionieren soll, weil die Struktur ist ja eigentlich eine ganz andere, von der PS3 zur PS4 beziehungsweise dann zur PS5. Also die PS4-Version kannst du auf PS5 spielen, aber die Architektur von der PS3, wurde ja damals immer so erklärt, ist ja eine andere als auf der PS4, und die soll ja auf der PS3 so komplex gewesen sein. Deswegen Frage ist jetzt die große Frage, wie funktioniert das mit diesem Port?
Say that they're canceled forever, but after the release of the Grand Theft Auto remaster trilogy that they did, where they upscaled GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas, there were plans for a Red Dead Redemption remaster and a Grand Theft Auto 4 remaster, which would have been really popular.
Ja, also ein Remaster will ich von GTA 4 nicht haben, sondern eher ein Remake. Wenn ein Remaster kommen würde, würde ich es natürlich auch mitnehmen.
As both of these games were huge and incredibly successful back in their heyday. Now, it seems like the development on these may have been paused, likely due to the backlash that the GTA Remaster Trilogy had for what most critics and players point out kind of being a lazier remaster with a lot of visual inconsistencies and performance issues. And
Also warum die das gemacht haben, weiß ich auch
It's
nicht.
also been suggested that Rockstar is going full in on development on Grand Theft Auto 6 right now, and perhaps those other projects needed to have the brakes paused a little bit. However, newer leaks and rumors from just a couple of months ago suggest that Red Dead Redemption and GTA 4
Also GTA 4 sehe ich dieses Jahr nicht mehr, dass da irgendwas released werden soll in 2023. Red Dead Redemption haben wir bekommen. Ist kein Remaster, ist ein Port.
Remastered are now back on the table. So perhaps there was a pause to rework some of the systems in place for remastering these games to avoid having the same problems they had with the previous trilogy re-release. So we don't fully know if these projects are fully canceled just yet.
Aber ich könnte mir vorstellen, dass es kommt. GTA 4 als Remastered oder als Remake wird kommen. Ich denke mal nicht, dass die einfach einen Port machen werden. Ich werde es mir trotzdem holen. Also wenn GTA 4 als Port kommt, dann gehe ich da rein. Ne? Ganz einfach. Bei Red Dead 1 ist das jetzt nochmal was anderes. Da warte ich erstmal.
Development. Really, time will tell, but I wouldn't be too surprised if we saw Red Dead Redemption Remastered and GTA 4 Remastered released sometime in the future. Now, we'd like to turn this around to you guys, though. If you're watching this far in the video, which Rockstar game would you have liked to see actually release more so than any other game on this list? Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Make sure you subscribe with notifications on for more videos like this, where we do deep dives into canceled series and look backs into other types of interesting video game things from the mid-2000s. We'd also like to give a huge shout out to our patrons for supporting our channel. Hey, if you have a few bucks, burn in a hole in your pocket,
Cancelled Saints Row Video, nice.
You get your name right here in the credits. Isn't that cool? If you pledge a little more, you get your name even in gold. So there's that incentive also. All right, that's it for today, though. We'll see you guys all next time with a brand new video.
Gutes Video. Hat mir sehr gut gefallen, dass man da mal so einen Überblick bekommt. Warte, hier Daumen nach oben natürlich immer geben. Nicht vergessen. Ja, mal gucken, was uns dieses Jahr noch erwartet, ob wir noch einen GTA 6 Trailer bekommen oder wenigstens einen kleinen Teaser, damit wir mal ein bisschen angefixt werden. Oder ob wir vielleicht auch einen Teaser für GTA 4 noch bekommen. Wer weiß das schon. Vielleicht hauen sie da auch einfach einen Port raus und sagen sich, oh, let's go. Machen wir ein bisschen Kohle, ne? Juti.